The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Councillor Vethrani rose from her seat, her insectoid wings clicking with barely contained irritation. 5 years, she declared, a translator rendering her clicks and hisses into words that echoed through the vast chamber. 5 years humanity has held provisional membership in this council, and still we know nothing of their warrior heritage. Captain Park J1 stood at attention beside Ambassador Yoon-Hae Ri, his dress uniform crisp and his expression carefully neutral as the Turellian representative continued her speech. Every species in this chamber has proven themselves through the crucible of conflict. Vethrani continued, gesturing with her forearms toward the assembled delegates. The Turellians survived our great unification war. The Cathmari endured their civil schism. The Veloxians overcame the machine rebellion. Yet humanity offers us nothing but trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Ambassador Yoon stepped forward, her diplomatic training keeping her voice calm and measured. Counselor, humanity has demonstrated our commitment to peaceful cooperation throughout our provisional period, she said. We have contributed to 17 joint scientific missions and established fair trade with 42 member worlds. Peace is easy when you have never known true war, Vethrani interrupted, her compound eyes glittering under the chamber lights. We demand proof of humanity's warrior spirit before we grant elevated status. Show us your battle scars. Show us the monuments to your great conflict. Show us the war that forged your species into what you are today. The other council members murmured in agreement, their various forms of communication filling the chamber with a symphony of sounds. High Arbiter Kesseth, an ancient crystalline being who had mediated council affairs for over 3,000 years, raised one shimmering appendage for silence. The request is within traditional protocols, Kesseth intoned, light refracting through their body in complex patterns. Many species have presented their martial histories as proof of their strength and unity. Humanity may do the same. Captain Park glanced at Ambassador Yoon, who gave him a subtle nod. He stepped forward, his boots clicking against the polished floor of the chamber. Councillor Vethrani, Park said, his voice steady and clear. I want to make sure I understand your request correctly. You wish to see humanity's battle scars from our defining conflict. Yes, Vethrani replied, her wings settling against her back. The war that united your species. The conflict that transformed you from primitives into a spacefaring civilization. Every worthy species has one. Park was quiet for a moment, and those closest to him could see something shift in his eyes. Something old and heavy. Which war would you like to know about? He asked. The question hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Various wings twitched in confusion. Which war? She repeated. I am asking about your species' great war. Your defining conflict. I understood the question, Park replied, his tone remaining respectful but firm. I am asking for clarification because humanity has fought many wars. Hundreds of major conflicts, thousands of smaller ones. Wars between nations, wars between ideologies. Wars between religions, wars that lasted days, and wars that lasted generations. A ripple of disbelief spread through the council chamber. The Cathmari delegate, a tall being with luminescent skin, leaned forward in their seat. Surely this is a translation error, they said. No species could survive such prolonged internal conflict. There is no error, Ambassador Yoon said. Stepping up beside Captain Park, human history is marked by continuous warfare. We developed increasingly sophisticated methods of killing each other long before we developed spaceflight. Councillor Vethrani made a sound that the translators struggled to interpret. Something between a laugh and a dismissal. Impossible, she declared. The Turellians fought one great war over 800 years ago, and it nearly destroyed us completely. You claim humanity fought hundreds of such conflicts and still exists? We do not claim it, Park said quietly, We lived it. We are still living with the consequences. High Arbiter. Kaseth's crystalline form pulsed with colors that indicated deep thought. Captain Park, the Arbiter said, are you prepared to substantiate these claims with evidence? Park looked at Ambassador Yoon, a silent question passing between them. The ambassador's expression was solemn as she nodded. With the Council's permission, Yoon said, I authorize Captain Park to access Earth's historical military archives and prepare a presentation for the Council. I warn you that what you see may be disturbing. We have all survived war, Vethrani said dismissively. We do not need protection from historical records. Park pulled out a small device and connected it to the chamber's holographic display system as he began accessing the archives. The chamber's SI suddenly spoke, alert. It announced in its neutral tone. Data transfer volume exceeds standard parameters. Estimated file count for requested category exceeds 2 million individual records. Audio and visual documentation exceeds 700,000 hours. Confirmed casualty figures across all conflicts exceed 900 million. Sentient beings. The chamber fell absolutely. Silent Vethrani's. Wings went rigid against her back. That cannot be. Accurate, she whispered, her translator barely catching the words. The AI is only counting documented conflicts with reliable records, Park said, his voice heavy with something the aliens could not quite identify. The true numbers are much higher. We did not always keep good records, especially in the early centuries. He looked up at the assembled council. These beings who had each survived 1 or 2 great wars and thought they understood conflict. You asked to see our battle scars, Park said. You asked which war defined us. The answer is that we were defined by all of them. Every wound, every loss. Every moment we chose to rebuild from the ashes and try again. He activated the display, and the seal of Earth's United Historical Archive appeared in glowing blue light. So I ask you again. Counselor, Park said, meeting Vethrani's compound eyes without flinching. Which war would you like to know about first? The chamber remained silent as the weight of humanity's violent past hung over them like a storm about to break. Ambassador Yoon stepped forward and addressed the council. We will begin with our ancient history, she said. Wars fought before most of your species had developed writing. Then we will move forward through time. It will take several sessions to cover everything. Several sessions? The Kethmari delegate asked, their luminescent skin flickering with uncertainty. At minimum, Yoon confirmed. And even then, we will only be covering the major conflicts. The ones that shaped continents and changed the course of our civilization. High Arbiter Kaseth signaled for order. The Council will reconvene tomorrow for humanity's presentation, Kaseth announced. I suggest all delegates prepare themselves. It seems we have much to learn about our newest members. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, Captain Park remained standing before the display. Watching the data scroll past, Ambassador Yoon approached him quietly. Are you ready for this? She asked in Korean. Their shared language offering a moment of privacy. Park did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched the names of wars scroll past on the screen, each one representing countless lives lost and futures destroyed. No one is ever ready to relive these memories, he finally said. But they asked to see our scars. They should understand what they are truly asking. He deactivated the display and turned to leave the chamber. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn what humanity had survived. Tomorrow, they would understand why humans valued peace so desperately, because no species in the known universe had paid a higher price to understand its true cost. The council chamber was packed beyond capacity when Captain Park took his position before the holographic display. The next day, word had spread quickly through the station about humanity's claims, and representatives from species who rarely attended Council sessions had come to witness the presentation. Counselor Vethrani sat in the front row, her compound eyes fixed on the human officer with what might have been skepticism or anticipation. Beside Captain Park stood Archivist Iseo Minjun, a historian who had spent her entire career studying human conflicts and their lasting impacts on civilization. Ambassador Yoon had specifically requested her presence, knowing that the weight of what they were about to share required someone who could provide proper context. Before we begin, Captain Park announced, his voice carrying through the silent chamber, I want to establish a timeline for perspective. The Turelian Great Unification War occurred approximately 800 years ago, correct? Councillor Vethrani nodded, her wings rustling slightly. That conflict remains the defining moment of our species, she confirmed. It united our 12 nations under one government and ended centuries of tension. I understand, Park said. The conflicts I'm about to show you began over 3,000 years before your war took place. They occurred before humanity had developed basic metalworking technology on many parts of Earth. A tone murmur swept through the chamber, but Park continued without pause. The holographic display activated, showing a map of an ancient world that the aliens did not recognize. This is the Mediterranean region of Earth, approximately 3,200 years ago, Archivist Iseo explained. Stepping forward, two great powers dominated this area, Rome and Carthage. Their conflict would last over 100 years and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. The display showed armies clashing, cities burning, and ships sinking beneath waves turned red with blood. The Romans eventually won, Seo continued. They destroyed Carthage completely, killed or enslaved its entire population, burned the city to the ground, and according to some accounts, salted the earth so nothing would ever grow there again. Observer Thelqua, a young Turelian junior diplomat, quietly calculated the timeline on her personal device. Her wings began to tremble as she realized the implications. This happened thousands of years before you reached space, she asked, her voice barely audible. This was just the beginning, Park confirmed. Around the same time period, on the other side of our world, the Warring States period in China saw 7 kingdoms fighting for supremacy over 250 years. Millions died in those conflicts. The display shifted to show vast armies marching across landscapes that seemed endless. We also have Alexander of Macedonia, who conquered most of the known world in just 13 years before dying at age 32, Seo added. Genghis Khan, who built an empire stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. His conquest resulted in the deaths of approximately 40 million people, which was about 10% of the world's population at that time. The Kethmari delegate made a sound of distress, their luminescent skin flickering rapidly. You are describing extinction-level casualties, they said. How did your species recover from such losses? We had children, Park said simply. We rebuilt our cities, we planted new crops, and then, when the wounds had barely healed, we went to war again. He looked at Councillor Vethrani, whose earlier skepticism had begun to fade into something else entirely. These conflicts I have shown you are from what we call ancient history, Park continued. They happened so long ago that we sometimes treat them as legends rather than reality. But the killing never stopped, it only evolved. The display shifted to show medieval battles, crusades across continents, colonial conquests, and revolutions that toppled empires. Century after century, generation after generation, humanity found new reasons to fight and new ways to kill each other, Archivist Iseo said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent years studying these horrors. Religious wars, territorial disputes, ideological conflicts, economic competition. The causes changed, but the result was always the same. Thelqua raised her hand tentatively. Forgive my interruption, she said. But I have been calculating as you spoke. based on the timeline you have presented. Humanity fought more wars before developing basic metallurgy than my species has fought in our entire recorded history. The chamber fell silent at this observation. Park nodded slowly. You are likely correct, he said. And we have not yet reached the wars that truly shaped modern humanity. Counselor Vethrani leaned forward in her seat. The ancient conflicts are noted, she said, her tone no longer dismissive. But surely there came a point when humanity unified. A single great war that ended all others and brought your species together. Park and Ambassador Yoon exchanged a look that the aliens could not quite interpret. It was a look of shared pain, of memories too heavy to carry alone. There was no single unifying war, Ambassador Yoon said, stepping forward to address the council directly. Humanity never stopped fighting long enough to truly unite. Even now, with one government representing Earth in this council, there are tensions and divisions that echo conflicts from centuries past. Then show us your greatest war, Vethrani demanded, though her voice had lost its earlier confidence. The conflict that came closest to unifying your species. Park was quiet for a long moment. There are two conflicts that fit that description, he finally said. They happened within 30 years of each other, and together they killed more humans than any other wars in our history. He activated a new section of the display, and the chamber filled with images of trenches stretching across blasted landscapes, men in gas masks stumbling through poison fog, and artillery shells falling like rain. We call the first one the Great War, Park said. Later, we renamed it World War because we realized it was only the beginning. World War, the Kethmari delegate repeated. A war encompassing your entire world? Multiple continents, dozens of nations, and approximately 20 million dead, Archivist ECO confirmed. It lasted 4 years and destroyed an entire generation of young men. We developed chemical weapons that melted lungs. We sent soldiers charging into machine gun fire, knowing they would die. We turned farming fields into graveyards. The display showed the trenches of Verdun, the mud and blood of Passchendaele, the broken bodies hanging on barbed wire. When it ended, we swore we would never let it happen again, Park said, his voice heavy. We called it the war to end all wars. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the chamber. We were wrong, he said. 20 years later, we did it again. Only worse. The display shifted to show new horrors, bombed cities, concentration camps, mushroom clouds rising over destroyed landscapes. The casualty counter appeared in the corner of the display, and as the numbers began to climb, Counselor Vethrani's wings went rigid. 30 million, 40 million, 50 million. The number kept rising. 70 to 85 million dead, Archivist SEO said when the counter finally stopped. The largest and deadliest conflict in human history. We call it World War II. And this war, Thelqua whispered, her young voice breaking. This war united you? Park shook his head slowly. No, he said. This war taught us that we could destroy ourselves completely if we were not careful. We developed weapons capable of ending all life on Earth. And then we spent the next 50 years pointing those weapons at each other. Waiting. The chamber was absolutely silent. Every alien present was staring at the humans with expressions ranging from horror to disbelief, to something that might have been fear. I have a question, Counselor Vethrani finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. After all of this, after every war and every death, after developing the power to destroy yourselves completely, how are you still here? Captain Park met her compound eyes without looking away. Because we also learned how to survive, he said. We learned how to rebuild, how to hope, how to try again even when everything seemed lost. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a network of old scars that trace patterns across his forearm. These are from shrapnel, he said. from a conflict that most of the galaxy has never heard of. I carry these scars every day, and every day, I choose to build something better instead of seeking revenge." He lowered his sleeve and faced the council. "That is humanity's true strength," he said. "Not that we survived our wars, but that we kept choosing to try for peace. Even when we failed, even when we fell back into violence, we never stopped trying." Counselor Vethrani was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "I request a recess," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I need to consult with my government before we continue." High Arbiter Kesseth granted her request, and the chamber began to empty. But long after the other delegates had left, Dalko remained in her seat, staring at the now dark display where the casualty numbers had finally stopped climbing. She was beginning to understand that the humans standing before her were not just survivors. They were something else entirely, something the galaxy had never seen before. The recess lasted 3 days. During that time, the station hummed with whispered conversations about the human presentation, and delegates who had not attended the session reviewed recordings with growing disbelief. Captain Park spent most of those 3 days in his quarters, preparing for what came next. He knew that World War II was not the end of the story, and he dreaded having to share what followed on the morning of the 4th day. The council reconvened. The chamber was even more crowded than before, with representatives from species who had never shown interest in human affairs suddenly demanding seats. Counselor Vethrani returned to her position in the front row. But something had changed in her bearing. The dismissive confidence was gone, replaced by a cautious uncertainty that looked strange on her rigid insectoid features. "Before we continue," High Arbiter Kesseth announced, their crystalline form pulsing with soft light, "I must inform the Council that several member species have formally requested copies of humanity's historical archives. The scale of documentation has overwhelmed our standard data transfer systems." Captain Park nodded in acknowledgement. "We are prepared to continue the presentation," he said. "With the Council's permission, Archivist SEO will provide additional context as we move forward through time." He activated the display, and the mushroom cloud of an atomic explosion filled the chamber once again. "When we ended our last session, I mentioned that humanity developed weapons capable of ending all life on Earth," Park said. "I want to explain exactly what that means." The display shifted to show 2 cities, their names written in English and Japanese characters: Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Archivist SEO said. In August of 1945, humanity used atomic weapons against populated cities for the first and only time in our history. These 2 bombs killed approximately 200,000 people instantly. Tens of thousands more died in the following months from radiation poisoning. The images that followed were difficult to look at: shadows burned permanently into stone walls, survivors with skin melting from their bodies, children born with deformities that would haunt generations. The Kethmari delegate turned away, their luminescent skin flickering erratically. "Use these weapons on your own species?" they asked, their voice strained. "Yes," Park confirmed. "And then we built more, much more powerful ones. Within 2 decades, humanity had enough nuclear weapons to destroy every city on Earth several times over. But you did not use them," Counselor Vethrani said, and her tone carried a note of something that might have been hope. "You stopped. We came close," Ambassador Yoon said, stepping forward to address the council. "For 50 years, 2 great powers pointed their weapons at each other and waited. We called it the Cold War. It was not peace, it was fear. Fear of what would happen if either side attacked first." The display showed maps with targets marked: submarines carrying missiles beneath frozen seas, bombers circling endlessly in the sky, waiting for orders that never came. Several times, "We nearly ended everything," Park said. technical malfunctions, misunderstandings, moments of panic. Any of them could have triggered the end of human civilization. We survived through luck as much as wisdom. Falqua, who had remained quiet since the recess, finally spoke. The Cold War ended. She said, I reviewed the records. Your two great powers eventually stopped threatening each other. They did, Archivist ECO confirmed. But that did not mean the violence stopped. It simply moved to different places. The display began cycling through conflicts that the aliens had never heard of. Korea, where millions died in a war that technically never ended. Vietnam, where chemical weapons defoliated entire forests and napalm fell like rain. Rwanda, where neighbors slaughtered neighbors with machetes while the world watched and did nothing. Bosnia, where cities were besieged for years and mass graves filled with innocent victims. Syria, where chemical weapons were used on civilian populations and ancient cities were reduced to rubble. These are conflicts that occurred after your species developed spaceflight, the Kefmari delegate observed, their voice hollow with disbelief. You were reaching for the stars while still killing each other on your homeworld. Yes, Park said. And there was no defense in his voice, only acknowledgement. We never stopped. The scale decreased after the world wars. But the violence continued. It continues still, in smaller forms. In quieter places. Counselor Vethrani's wings began to twitch in a pattern that the translator could not interpret. I must ask the question that I believe everyone in this chamber is thinking, she said, her voice carrying an edge that was not quite anger. How are you not extinct? The question echoed through the silent chamber. Park was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because war is not the only thing humanity learned, he said. We also learned how to heal, how to rebuild, how to remember. He gestured to Archivist ECO, who changed the display. The images of destruction were replaced by something else entirely, monuments rising from scarred landscapes, museums preserving the memories of the fallen, schools teaching children about the horrors of war so they would never forget. After every conflict, we built memorials, Park explained. We did not hide our shame or pretend the violence never happened. We carved the names of the dead into stone. We preserved the ruins as warnings. We told our children the truth about what we did so they might choose differently. The display showed the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington. A black wall reflecting the faces of visitors who came to mourn it showed Auschwitz, preserved exactly as it was found. A permanent reminder of humanity's capacity for evil. It showed Hiroshima's Peace Memorial Park, built on the very ground where the atomic bomb fell. We remember, Ambassador Yoon said, not because we are proud of what we did, but because we know what happens when we forget. Every generation must learn the cost of war, or they will be doomed to pay it again. Thulka rose from her seat, her young eyes glistening with something the translator could not identify. Forgive me, she said, but I need to understand. You carry all of this inside you. Every human, every day. How do you bear it? Captain Park looked at the young Tyrellian diplomat, and for a moment, his carefully maintained composure softened. We do not carry it alone, he said. We carry it together. Every memorial, every museum, every history lesson. They are ways of sharing the burden. When one generation grows tired, the next takes up the weight. He paused, gathering his thoughts. And we carry hope, he continued. Hope that the next generation will be wiser, that they will find ways to resolve their differences without bloodshed, that someday the violence will truly end. But you said the violence continues, Counselor Vethrani pointed out. You admitted that even now, humans still fight each other. We do, Park acknowledged. But less than before. The scale has decreased. The frequency has decreased. We are not perfect. We may never be perfect. But we are trying, every day. We are trying to be better than we were. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Finally, High Arbiter Kesseth spoke, their crystalline form pulsing with complex patterns of light. I have observed many species join this council over 3,000 years. The Arbiter said, I have seen warriors and scholars, conquerors and peacekeepers, but I have never seen a species quite like humanity. The ancient being turned to face the council directly. Most species who survive great wars learn to fear conflict. Kesseth continued, they build their societies around preventing any return to violence. They succeed because they remember one great trauma and are determined never to repeat it. The Arbiter's attention shifted to the humans. Humanity is different, Kesseth said. You have experienced not one great trauma but hundreds. You have fallen into darkness again and again, and each time you have climbed back toward the light. Not because you forgot the darkness, but because you refused to let it define you. Park felt the weight of those words settle over him like a familiar burden. We are not asking for sympathy, he said. We are not asking you to forgive what we have done. We are only asking you to understand who we are and how we became this way. He looked at Counselor Vethrani, whose earlier demands now seemed very far away. You asked to see our battle scars, Park said. Now you understand why we have so many. The question is whether you still want us in this council. Knowing what we are capable of, Vethrani was silent. Her compound eyes fixed on the human who had just exposed his species. Darkest secrets without shame or excuse. I need more time to consider, she finally said. This is not what I expected. High Arbiter Kesseth signaled for another recess as the delegates filed out. Thelqua approached Captain Park with hesitant steps. May I speak with you privately? She asked. I have questions that I do not wish to ask in front of the council. Park nodded. And as the chamber emptied around them, two beings from very different worlds prepared to have a conversation that would change everything. The observation deck was empty when Captain Park and Thelqua arrived. Stars stretched endlessly beyond the transparent walls, and somewhere in that vast darkness, Earth orbited its yellow sun, carrying the weight of human history on its scarred surface. Thelqua stood near the window, her wings folded tightly against her back in what Park had learned was a sign of deep contemplation among Torellians. I reviewed more of your historical records during the recess, she said, without turning around. I could not sleep, so I spent the entire night reading. Park moved to stand beside her, keeping a respectful distance. What did you find? He asked. Contradictions. Thelqua replied, finally turning to face him. Your species has committed atrocities that would shame the darkest chapters of Torellian history. You have enslaved each other. You have tortured each other. You have destroyed entire cultures for the sake of resources and power. She paused, her compound eyes searching his face for something she could not name. But I also found stories of humans risking their lives to save strangers, she continued. Soldiers who refused to fire on enemies who had surrendered. Entire nations who sheltered refugees from persecution. Individuals who stood against their own governments to protect the innocent. Both things are true, Park said quietly. Humanity is capable of tremendous cruelty and tremendous compassion, sometimes in the same war, sometimes from the same individuals. Thelqua made a clicking sound that the translator interpreted as confusion. How do you live with such contradiction? She asked. Among my people, we speak of the Great Unification War as a necessary evil, a darkness that we pass through to reach the light. But your darkness never ended. You passed through it again and again. Park was silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. After our world wars, something interesting happened in Europe, he finally said. The nations that had spent centuries fighting each other, killing millions of each other's people, destroying each other's cities. They decided to try something different. The European Union, Thelqua said. I read about it. Former enemies agreeing to cooperate economically and politically. More than that, Park said. They agreed to trust each other. France and Germany, two nations that had fought 3 devastating wars in 70 years, chose to become partners instead of enemies. They integrated their economies so completely that war between them became not just unthinkable but impossible. Falco's wings rustled thoughtfully. And it worked? It is still working, Park confirmed. Not perfectly. There are still disagreements and tensions. But no one seriously expects France and Germany to go to war again. The cycle of revenge was broken. He turned to look out at the stars. There are other examples, he continued. Japan and South Korea were brutal enemies during our Second World War. Japan occupied Korea and committed terrible crimes against its people. For decades afterward, there was hatred and distrust between them. But they are allies now, Tolkwa said. I saw this in the records as well. It took time, Park said. It took apologies and reparations and generations of people choosing to build something new instead of clinging to old grievances. The wounds are not fully healed. Perhaps they never will be. But both nations chose progress over revenge. Thelkua was quiet for a long moment. Among my people, we have a saying, she finally said, the war ends when the last soldier dies. We believe that conflict can only truly be over when no one remains who remembers the fighting. Humans believe the opposite. Park said, we believe that the war ends when we choose to stop fighting. Regardless of what we remember, forgetting leads to repetition. Remembering leads to choice. That is a harder path, Felko observed. It is, Park agreed. But it is the only path that leads forward instead of in circles. The young diplomat's wings relaxed slightly, and she moved to sit on one of the observation deck's benches. May I ask you a personal question? She said. Park nodded and sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. Your scars, Thelkwa said, gesturing toward his arm. You showed them to the council as proof of humanity's survival. But you did not explain how you received them. Park rolled up his sleeve again, revealing the network of pale lines that traced across his skin. There was a conflict in my region of Earth about 15 years ago, he said. A dispute over territory and resources that escalated into violence. I was young, barely an adult. I thought I understood what war meant from the history books. He traced one of the scars with his finger. I learned that reading about war and experiencing it are very different things. He continued. I saw friends die. I saw enemies who were just as frightened as I was. I saw villages destroyed and families torn apart over land that neither side would truly own. Delco listened without interrupting when it ended. I spent years trying to understand what it had all been for, Park said. The borders moved a few kilometers in one direction. A few thousand people died, and both sides claimed victory while mourning their losses. Did you find an answer? Thelko asked. I found a question instead, Park replied. I started asking myself what it would take to break the cycle, to make sure the next generation would not have to learn the same lessons through blood. He lowered his sleeve and looked at the young Tyrellian. That question led me here, he said. To the Galactic Council, to this conversation with you. I believe that if humanity can learn to live peacefully with species who are truly alien to us, perhaps we can finally learn to live peacefully with each other. Telko was quiet for a long moment before speaking again. I came to this council as an observer, she said. I was told to learn how diplomacy works at the galactic level and to support Council of Vethrani's agenda. I was not supposed to have opinions of my own. And now? Park asked. Now I have many opinions, Tolkwa admitted. Some of them might cause problems for my career. She stood and walked back to the window, her reflection ghostly against the backdrop of stars. Counselor, Vethrani came to this meeting expecting to find a young species that needed to prove its strength, she said. She expected humans to show one great war and ask for respect, instead. You showed us hundreds of wars and asked for understanding. We do not need respect, Park said, joining her at the window. We have survived long enough to know that respect earned through violence is worth nothing. What we want is the chance to build something better, together with species who might help us see our own blind spots. Thulko made a sound that the translator interpreted as something between a laugh and a sigh. You are a strange species, Captain Park, she said. You have every reason to be proud of your strength and resilience. Instead, you show your wounds openly and admit your failures without excuse. Would you prefer if we pretended to be something we are not? Park asked. No, Thalqua said immediately. I find your honesty refreshing among the Turellians. We speak of our great unification war as if it was glorious and necessary. We do not speak of the atrocities committed on both sides. We do not teach our children about the villages burned or the prisoners executed. She turned to face Park directly. Perhaps we should, she said. Perhaps if we remembered our war the way you remember yours, we would be better prepared to prevent the next one. Before Park could respond, his communication device chimed. Ambassador Yoon's voice came through. Calm but urgent. Captain, the council is reconvening early. Councillor Vethrani has requested to speak before the full assembly. Her delegation says it is important. Park looked at Thulqua, who seemed as surprised as he was. I was not informed of this, she admitted. We should go, Park said. Whatever your counselor has decided, we need to hear it together. As they made their way back to the council chamber, Thulqua walked beside Park in thoughtful silence. She did not know what Vethrani was about to say, but she knew that this conversation with the human captain had changed something fundamental in her. Understanding of the galaxy. Stars were not just filled with species who had survived their wars. They were filled with species who were still learning from them, and perhaps that was the most important lesson of all. The council chamber was completely silent as Councillor Vethrani rose from her seat. Every delegate was present, and even the station support staff had found reasons to linger near the chamber doors. Eager to witness what was about to unfold, Captain Park stood at his usual position beside Ambassador Yoon, his expression carefully neutral as he watched the Turellian representative approach the central speaking platform. Vethrani's wings were folded tightly against her back, and her movements carried a weight that had not been there when she first demanded proof of humanity's warrior spirit. When I called for this presentation, Vethrani began, her translator rendering her clicks and hisses with unusual clarity. I expected to find a young species desperate to prove its worth. I expected tales of a single great war, perhaps embellished for dramatic effect. I expected to judge humanity's strength by standards that my species established long ago. She paused, her compound eyes sweeping across the assembled delegates. I was wrong, she said. Simply a murmur rippled through the chamber. But Vethrani raised one of her four arms for silence. The Turellian Great Unification War occurred 800 years ago. She continued. It lasted 17 years and killed approximately 12 million of our people. It reshaped our world, ended our era of warring nations, and established a unified government that represents us in this council today. She turned to face the humans directly. We have built our entire identity around that single conflict, she said. We call ourselves survivors of the Great War. We teach our children that we passed through fire and emerged stronger. We believe that no other species could truly understand what we endured. Her wings rustled slightly, a sign of emotional disturbance that her translator could not convey. I now understand how arrogant that belief was, Vethrani admitted. Humanity has survived not one great war but hundreds. You have faced extinction-level conflicts repeatedly and somehow continue to exist. You have developed weapons capable of destroying your entire world, and then chosen not to use them. She looked at Captain Park, and something shifted in her compound eyes. "What strikes me most is not your capacity for violence," she said. "Every species in this chamber has proven its ability to kill. What strikes me is your capacity for memory. You do not hide from your history or pretend it did not happen. You preserve it, you study it. You teach it to your children so they will understand the true cost of war." The Kefmari delegate leaned forward in their seat, their luminescent skin pulsing with interest. "Among the Tyrellians, we speak of our great war in abstract terms," Vethrani continued. "We honor the dead but do not dwell on the methods of their dying. We celebrate our victory but do not examine the atrocities committed to achieve it. We remember the end result but not the journey that brought us there." She made a sound that the translator struggled to interpret, something between regret and revelation. "Humanity remembers everything," she said. "The trenches and the gas attacks, the atomic bombs and the concentration camps. The children killed and the cities destroyed. You carry all of this with you. Not as shame to be hidden, but as lessons to be learned." Vethrani turned to address High Arbiter Keseth directly. "I came to this council demanding that humanity prove its strength through tales of war," she said. "Instead, humanity proved something far more valuable. It proved its wisdom, its honesty, its determination to learn from its mistakes, even when those mistakes cost millions of lives." The ancient crystalline being pulsed with colors that indicated deep approval. "What is your recommendation regarding humanity's petition for elevated status?" Keseth asked. Formally Varani's wings spread slightly, a gesture of formal declaration among her people. "I formally endorse humanity's petition," she announced. "Not because they have proven themselves as warriors, but because they have proven themselves as survivors who learn from their survival. Any species that can face its own darkness so honestly deserves a place at this council's highest levels." The chamber erupted in a cascade of sounds as delegates discussed this unexpected endorsement. High Arbiter Keseth called for order, their crystalline form chiming with harmonic frequencies that cut through the noise. "The Tyrellian delegation has offered its endorsement," Keseth announced. "Does any delegate wish to speak against the petition before we proceed to a vote?" Silence fell over the chamber. One by one, the delegates who had seemed most skeptical of humanity exchanged glances with their neighbors and remained seated. "Very well," Keseth said. "The council will now vote on humanity's petition for elevated status within the WIS Galactic Assembly." The voting proceeded quickly, each delegation registering their decision through the chamber's central system. When the final tally appeared on the display, Ambassador Yoon felt her breath catch in her throat. Unanimous approval. Every single delegation, including species who had voiced concerns just days earlier, had voted in favor of humanity's advancement. Captain Park felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he had not realized he was carrying until it was gone. High Arbiter Keseth rose to their full height, light refracting through their ancient crystalline form in patterns of celebration. "By unanimous vote of the Galactic Council, humanity is hereby granted elevated status within the Assembly," Keseth declared. "All rights and responsibilities of this position are now in effect. May your species continue to grow in wisdom as you have grown in strength." The chamber filled with sounds of congratulation as delegates moved to offer their recognition to the human representatives. But through the crowd, Captain Park noticed a familiar figure approaching. Thela made her way through the taller delegates until she stood before him, her young eyes bright with something that looked like hope. "May I ask you one more question?" she said. Park nodded, stepping slightly away from the crowd to give them some privacy. "Do you truly believe humanity has left war behind?" Thelqua asked. "After everything you showed us, after all the cycles of violence, do you believe your species will finally break the pattern?" Park was silent for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. "No, he finally said. And he saw Thelqua's wings droop slightly at the honesty. I do not believe we have left war behind completely. We are still learning, still struggling with the same impulses that drove our ancestors to violence. He looked out at the chamber full of alien species, each with their own histories of conflict and survival. But every generation, we get a little better at choosing differently, he continued. Every war teaches us something new about the cost of violence. Every peace we build lasts a little longer than the one before. We are not perfect. We may never be perfect. But we are trying. Thelka's wings slowly rose again. That is a more honest answer than I expected, she admitted. Would you prefer a comforting lie? Park asked. No, Thelka said. And something in her voice suggested that she was making a decision about more than just this conversation. I think I prefer the truth, even when it is difficult. She extended one slender arm in a gesture that Park recognized as a Tyrellian sign of respect between equals. Thank you for showing us who humanity really is, she said. I believe the galaxy is better for knowing, Park returned the gesture, carefully mimicking the angle and timing he had observed from other Tyrellian interactions. And thank you for listening, he replied. Not everyone would have been willing to hear what we had to say, as the celebrations continued around them. Park excused himself and made his way to the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the transparent walls. And somewhere in that vast darkness, Earth continued its ancient orbit. Park thought about all the battlefields he had studied, all the monuments he had visited, all the names carved in stone walls and memorial gardens across his homeworld. He thought about the trenches of Verdun and the ashes of Hiroshima, the killing fields of Cambodia and the ruins of Aleppo. He thought about every soldier who had ever chosen mercy over revenge, every diplomat who had forged peace from the wreckage of war, every teacher who had shown children the truth about history so they might choose a different path. Ambassador Yoon found him there an hour later, still staring out at the stars. The council session is over, she said gently. There is a celebration waiting for you. I know, Park replied without turning around. I just needed a moment. You moved to stand beside him, following his gaze toward the distant point of light that was Earth's sun. What are you thinking about? She asked. Park was quiet for a long moment before answering. I'm thinking about every person who died in every war we described today, he said. I am thinking about whether we did them justice by telling their stories honestly. We did what we could, Yoon said. We showed the council the truth, and they accepted it. Yes, Park agreed. But the truth is not just about gaining acceptance. The truth is about making sure we never forget why peace matters. He turned away from the window and faced his ambassador. Every scar I carry reminds me of someone who did not survive, he said. Every memorial I visit carries names of people who deserve to live. We owe it to them to keep trying, to keep building, to keep choosing peace, even when it is harder than violence. You nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind his words. Then let us go celebrate, she said. Not just our victory today, but everything that made it possible. Every lesson learned, every cycle broken. Every person who chose differently.